Hey, welcome to our closer look today. We're going to be diving into the story of Marilyn Monroe, someone, well, everyone recognizes her, right?
Absolutely, an icon.
Exactly. But instead of just the usual life story, we want to explore some of the really um, interesting and unusual things that happened during her life, especially towards the end.
Yeah, there are a lot of records and interviews out there, that hint at a much bigger picture than we often hear.
It's quite remarkable how many unanswered questions and, well, theories still surround her.
Definitely. From just everyday rumors right up to more substantial ideas, it really suggests that what we think we know might only be, like, the beginning.
Exactly. So today, we want to get into some of those key questions. Was her death really as straightforward as it was reported? Probably not, right?
Seems unlikely when you look closer.
And what kind of relationships did she have with some incredibly powerful people? And are there secrets that have stayed hidden all this time?
So many layers.
Okay, let's start at the beginning, though. Norma Jean Martinson. She had a pretty tough childhood, didn't she?
Oh, she really did. With an absent father and her mother struggling with mental health, often hospitalized, her early life was quite unstable. She spent a lot of time in foster care.
Right. And then at just 16, she got married.
hmm
It seemed like she was looking for, a way out of that difficult situation.
It does seem that way, though, sadly, that marriage didn't last.
No. But even with all that going on, her natural talent and, well, her beauty really seemed to come through.
They certainly did. And a really significant moment came in 1944. Remember that photo? A Hollywood photographer discovered her while she was working in a munitions factory.
Yeah, that one picture.
That single photograph actually led to a modeling contract in Los Angeles and marked the real start of her journey into acting.
But those early days in Hollywood weren't the glamorous picture we often imagine, were they?
Not at all. She faced a lot of the same struggles as, many aspiring actors, taking any low-paying job she could find, dealing with real financial hardship. That's right. But what's important to remember is how incredibly dedicated she was to learning her craft.
Yeah. Even while facing all those challenges, she was taking acting classes. This was the period where Norma Jean really started to sort of develop that iconic Marilyn Monroe persona.
Now, this is where things get really interesting. As we start to see some of the less glamorous aspects of Hollywood at that time, there's talk about how powerful the talent agencies were and some really disturbing suggestions about how they operated.
What's particularly unsettling is the information suggesting that some powerful executives in these agencies allegedly kept lists of young women trying to become actresses who were vulnerable to exploitation.
Wow.
It wasn't solely about talent, unfortunately.
And one name that comes up quite a bit in this context is Joseph Schenck, head of 20th Century Fox.
Right, a huge studio. Think of the films they made. That shows his influence.
Exactly. And Marilyn's name was reportedly on one of those lists. I mean, the insight here is that even as someone was working so hard for their dreams, they could be really vulnerable to these powerful systems. It paints a concerning picture of the power dynamics at play, definitely. However, it's also important to acknowledge Marilyn wasn't just passive in this system.
Right.
She did strategically use connections to gain opportunities, to get recognition. Her aim was always to get her undeniable talent noticed.
Exactly. It wasn't just about using others. She was also incredibly hardworking. People who worked with her often mentioned her dedication to training, even after incredibly long days on set.
Yeah, that drive was a big part of why she became such a huge global star.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see this real contrast, don't we, between the carefully crafted public image of Marilyn and the much more difficult reality of her private life.
Oh, absolutely. It seemed marked by a lot of disappointment, unhappiness, sorrow even.
Her first divorce was tough, and the marriages that followed seemed to involve, well, exploitation and even domestic problems sometimes.
It gives you a sense of the struggle she was dealing with privately behind the scenes.
Yeah. And what's also deeply sad is that she experienced the loss of 2 pregnancies.
Those personal tragedies undoubtedly made her struggles with depression even more difficult. Just unimaginable.
And as a result, she started relying on sleeping pills, antidepressants.
Which unfortunately led to addiction and a period in a mental health facility. It sounds like she was fighting so much.
So much.
Indeed. And then in January 1961, she divorced her third husband, Arthur Miller.
Okay.
Interestingly, this period of personal upheaval coincided with a significant shift in the political landscape, specifically the inauguration of President John F. Kennedy.
Right. And that connection would soon intertwine with Marilyn's life in really unexpected ways.
Exactly.
Which then leads to the big question. How did someone like Marilyn Monroe, a Hollywood star, connect with the President of the United States? It seems like such an unlikely pairing, you know?
Well, the connection, according to reports, came through Peter Lawford.
Okay, JFK's brother-in-law.
Right. And he was also part of Frank Sinatra's social circle, connecting back to another powerful figure we mentioned earlier.
Interesting link. And Lawford allegedly had this specific role, finding companions for powerful men, including both JFK and his brother, Robert Kennedy.
That's the allegation. It suggests a particular kind of, well, social dynamic was at play back then. Reports indicate that Marilyn was introduced to the Kennedys at Lawford's home shortly after the inauguration.
And both brothers were there, John and Robert.
Both were said to be at that initial meeting, yes.
And here's a really intriguing twist in the story. Their interactions were allegedly secretly recorded.
Yeah, apparently by someone who was an adversary of Robert Kennedy.
Oh, way.
This individual had apparently placed microphones in Marilyn's home. Those recordings supposedly revealed she was involved with both brothers at the same time.
Wow, that adds a whole other layer of complexity and, frankly, potential danger.
It really does. It raises an important question about how much Marilyn was being watched and the potential risks she was unknowingly facing.
Uh-huh.
And the story gets even more complex. There was the discovery of FBI files on Marilyn in Robert Kennedy's former office.
FBI files. On Marilyn.
Yes, which linked her to the Communist Party.
Whoa. Okay, the Communist Party link. The key insight here must be how intense the suspicion and fear of communist influence was back then, right? During the Cold War.
Exactly. It could intertwine with personal relationships, potentially turning even a celebrity into a perceived national security risk.
And to really understand how significant that was, we need to remember the historical context.
Yeah.
The Cold War was happening. The Cuban Revolution had just taken place.
Right. Any connection to communism at that time was incredibly sensitive, especially for someone in the public eye and someone with connections to the White House.
Absolutely. So what did these files say?
Precisely. The information reportedly detailed a meeting Marilyn allegedly had in Mexico with people involved in the Cuban Communist movement and associates of Fidel Castro.
Seriously. And during this alleged meeting, Marilyn supposedly shared details of conversations she'd had with the Kennedy brothers.
That's the report, including political information that they had told her.
Oh my goodness. That suggests, either a real closeness and trust, or maybe a lack of awareness from the Kennedys about the potential consequences.
It's hard to say. But what's crucial here is that the FBI was allegedly aware of Marilyn's activities.
So the authorities knew.
Apparently, this wasn't happening in a vacuum.
All of this seems to be creating a more and more dangerous situation for Marilyn. We know she famously appeared at President Kennedy's birthday celebration just a few months before she died.
Yeah, singing that very well-known happy birthday, unforgettable moment.
Truly. And then, less than a month before her death, there was reportedly another significant meeting between Marilyn and President Kennedy at Peter Lawford's beach house.
Yes, and the details of what they discussed are, well, quite startling.
Shockingly, their conversation allegedly involved details about atomic bomb testing.
Can you imagine atomic bomb testing?
It's almost unbelievable.
Furthermore, there was reportedly an argument between Marilyn and Kennedy during lunch about the ethics of nuclear testing.
So she wasn't afraid to speak her mind, even to the president.
Seems not. It suggests she had strong beliefs and expressed them. Then, the story goes, Marilyn went to Robert Kennedy's home, where they also talked about the same sensitive subject, atomic testing.
It really shows how much inside information she might have had access to, doesn't it?
It does, and this directly relates, potentially, to Robert Kennedy's trip to Nevada soon after.
To witness an atomic bomb test.
Exactly. The timing seems very, very significant.
Especially when you think about the very tense international situation. Fidel Castro was reportedly worried about a U.S. nuclear attack, even asking the Soviets for help.
Right. So, the alleged mistake, the Kennedys revealing their nuclear testing plans to Marilyn.
Who had these alleged connections to the Communist Party?
And was reportedly troubled by the idea of nuclear war.
Yeah, that could have had serious international consequences. Major consequences.
The potential danger of Marilyn revealing this kind of information publicly must have felt huge to them.
You can see how she might suddenly become a significant security risk in their eyes.
Definitely. And following these events, Robert Kennedy reportedly called Marilyn.
And told her what?
Told her to end all contact with the Kennedy family. Just cut ties.
Wow. That must have been a significant blow, given their relationships.
You'd have to assume so.
And it's reported that Marilyn was very upset and depressed after this, leading to her using more alcohol and sleeping pills.
The combination that was ultimately reported as the cause of her death.
But the timeline is what makes you really wonder, isn't it?
It really is. Marilyn, who had faced so many personal challenges, who had actively sought help for her issues.
Yeah, she'd been through treatment.
Right. Supposedly died by suicide less than a month after these highly suspicious events involving the Kennedys. It just seems incredibly sudden.
Let's look at how her body was discovered. August 5th, by her housekeeper, Eunice Murray. The details are quite strange.
They really are.
She was found lying on her bed with a telephone in her hand.
Okay.
But the cord was disconnected. How likely is that if you've taken pills?
It certainly makes you question things. It seems unlikely someone would pass away and then disconnect the phone cord. It doesn't make logical sense.
No. And Marilyn had reportedly told all her household staff to leave that night, not to bother her.
Right.
Yet Murray called the police at 4:30 a.m., saying she'd found Marilyn much earlier, around 3:30 a.m.
Why the delay? That's a big gap in time.
A significant delay in calling for help. And furthermore, Murray reportedly called Marilyn's psychiatrist before she contacted the police.
That's unusual, isn't it? Not the typical order of things in an emergency situation.
Not at all. And speaking of her psychiatrist, Dr. Greenson,
Yeah.
he had actually visited Marilyn on the night she died.
Right, making him one of the last people to see her alive.
Which leads to a theory that he might have even been involved somehow with her medications, perhaps tampering with them.
The fact that he was there so close to her death certainly fuels speculation. And going back to the phone in her hand.
Yeah, who's she trying to call?
Exactly. And it's interesting, isn't it, that Marilyn's phone records were never released.
Very unusual in such a high-profile case. The argument is those records might have shown her state of mind, who she was talking to.
Potentially indicating it wasn't suicide.
Maybe suggesting foul play. And moreover, her autopsy report, described as allegedly incomplete, inconclusive.
Which just leads to more suspicion, doesn't it? That maybe it was deliberately flawed to hide the real reason she died.
And here's another piece of the puzzle. Shortly before she died, Marilyn was writing a book.
Yes, the memoir.
About her life, her experiences. You have to wonder who she might have talked about in that book.
Especially given her recent involvement with powerful figures.
Considering everything we've discussed, the Kennedy family would certainly be a major point of speculation regarding what might have been in that book.
Absolutely. And the fact that the manuscript and her notes reportedly disappeared after her death.
Vanished. Yeah, also very suspicious.
It just adds to the mystery.
Adding even more, some neighbors and people passing by claimed to have seen Robert Kennedy's car outside Marilyn's home on the night she died.
That's a pretty significant claim, even if it's just eyewitness reports. RFK's car. There.
On that specific night. And the scene itself, the fact that there were reportedly no fingerprints on the empty pill bottle found near her.
Right. That suggests it might have been staged, doesn't it? Wiped clean? To look like a suicide or overdose?
It implies someone else might have been involved in setting up the scene.
And disturbingly, there are also reports of bruises and injuries on Marilyn's body.
Which could suggest a struggle or an assault. That doesn't really fit with the official account of a peaceful suicide from pills.
No, it doesn't align well at all. Yet despite all these inconsistencies, all these theories,
The official cause of death remained barbiturate poisoning, sedative medication.
with no clear determination of whether it was self-administered or not, the lack of a definitive conclusion is really striking in such a famous case.
It really is. And it's worth mentioning, the Kennedys aren't the only ones who've been suspected over the years.
True. Her former husband, Joe DiMaggio, has also faced some scrutiny. Apparently, they had a very heated argument shortly before her death.
Over money, wasn't it? And there were alleged threats made?
That's the report, yes. So there are other threads, other possibilities.
But ultimately, as you said, the theory involving the Kennedys remains one of the most prominent, most talked about explanations for the many, many unanswered questions surrounding her death.
It's certainly one of the most compelling, given the stakes involved, but it is just one of several possibilities involving the powerful people in her life.
So we're left with this incredibly complicated web of information, aren't we?
Yeah.
And just so many things we still don't know about Marilyn Monroe's life, and especially her death.
What seems clear from looking at all these details is that there's a real possibility of hidden truths. And, well, the immense power that influential figures can wield.
Yeah. And it makes you really think, Considering all the things that don't quite add up and the political and social climate of the time, what really happened to Marilyn Monroe?
What does her story tell us about power, about secrets, and maybe about how fragile fame can actually be?
It's definitely something to keep in mind, to mull over. A story with maybe more questions than answers, even now.